Deadpool Negative here. In my last, I want to get another video out before the end of the month. In my last video, I discussed the comic Haywire, and at the very end, I pointed out that the ending of Haywire seemed to have inspired the ending of a comic that came out about 15 years later called Fraction. And I said I was planning to cover this, so I might as well talk about Fraction now. Now, Fraction was a 2004 series, part of a short-lived DC line called DC Focus. While it was shepherded by editor Andrew Helfer, he had left the company by the time the books actually shipped, and the line was, I believe, run by Joan Hilty. It was basically superpowers in a world without superheroes or superpower-esque things. There was the centerpiece of the line was Steve Gerber's Hard Time, which was about a kid convicting of a school shooting who somehow gets psychic powers while in jail, but it was also a lot of social commentary. And I'll be blunt, it deserves to be collected, but it wasn't Gerber at his best. And then there was also Kinetic, which was Kelly Puckett. Remember Kelly Puckett? No, I don't either. And Warren Please. Remember Warren Please? I actually do. About a crippled boy gaining superpowers, and Touch, which was a series I wish they would is the only series they didn't collect. They only collected the first 6 issues of Hard Time, but it complete runs of Fraction and Kinetic. And Touch they didn't collect, and it was about a guy who had the power to grant superpowers to other people, and he would use it, and he would use them basically as he would be their freelance agent for them. He was more like doing parlor trips and celebrity. It was actually, as far as I can tell, John Francis Moore's swan song comics. And I was hoping, like with Wes Craig's ascendancy, like it would have gotten some resurrection due to his involvement of it. All the series were creator participation. The copyrights for Fraction says David Tischman and DC Comics. So I don't know the status of, and I'm pretty sure this printing of Fraction is long out of print. But anyway, Fraction at the end of Haywire, and according to writer Kevin Dooley, assistant editor Kevin Dooley, it was always planned to end this way. At least the first quote unquote chapter of it. The remains of the Haywire armor is found in a locker. Now again, Andrew Helfer is credited as the editor on both these books, at least initial editor, but they were mostly edited by someone else. But I do notice, and in the very first scene, in one of the early scenes of Fraction, the four main characters, four Philadelphia buddies, high school buddies buddies since high school, I should say. Trent, Mike, Ford, and Pete. They used to do crime when they were kids, and one of them, they decided to break into a storage locker for kicks, and they find a robot suit. Again, who knows? Was it intended as a sequel to Haywire? Was it fed to Tischman, or is it just complete coincidence? David Tischman is best known for his collaborations with Howard Chaykin on books like on Son of Superman, American Century, and he only really did 2 solo runs, Fraction and his run on Cable, which I highly recommend. It's probably the second best Cable run. That's because the best Cable run is actually the Darko McCann run that came immediately after it when he left the series. Unfortunately, you can only get that in an omnibus called Soldier X, but I highly recommend the Tischman and later McCann run of Cable because it's the best Cable comics you'll ever read. Until somebody at Marvel realizes, oh wait, let's just make Cable what he's like in those books, and not just mire him in X continuity. And I think Fabian Nicieza could do that, but you people aren't smart enough to hire Fabian Nicieza back on Cable on a regular basis. So, but the only other solo thing he did was a Star Trek miniseries, and then he kind of fell off the comic scene in the mid 2000s. He hasn't didn't do any more collaborations with Chaykin. I found his work to be, with Chaykin and without Chaykin, fairly mixed. There's pulp. There's a particularly comic called Pulp Fantastic, which really bothered me. But I have to say, Fraction is fun. It is basically one of those slow burn crime thrillers that, with low budget, that you'd find, opening in the smaller end of the theater in the mid 2000s. Um, Again, it's about four guys from Philly named Mike, Trent, sorry, Mike, Trent, Ford, and Pete. And the shit. Now, as a resident of Philadelphia, this comic doesn't really. Artist Timothy Green, who's done a lot of work with Keith Giffen. I should also say, one of the reasons I think the Focus line failed was all the books launched with horrible, horrible looking Tomer Hanukkah covers. Like, no, those covers aren't good. Stop pretend that art's not good. Stop pretending it's going to appeal to anyone. But definitely Timothy Green's, one of the Timothy Green's original covers is the cover for this collection. And I think Tischman did minimal research. Like, there's definitely, the one Italian of the group. He has the South Philly Italian mother stereotype, but it works. But instead of these four guys, instead of hence to make up for the title of the book, Fraction, what they decide to do is just divide the gauntlets, the boots, the helmet, and the chest plate into their own version, into their own. They share them and try to use them to make their lives easier. One's going through divorce, one's a petty criminal, one's living with his mother. One's trying to avoid, trying not to miss off his parole officer. And as it progresses, one tactic I was never a huge fan of Tischman was he really loved to use captions to describe. He had an overuse of captions, Claremont-esque overuse of captions. I'll give you one example is this CIA agent knew about 9/11 on 7/23, or this character blah blah blah, and he would just give story. And it wasn't so much that this dialogue was bad or the characterization was bad. It was just can't he trust the artist to do their work? He wasn't Chris Claremont. He didn't have Chris Claremont's gift for characterization and pacing. He was good. I think Tischman was a good writer. This was a good start, but sometimes he would just. But in Fraction, the descriptive captions, there's enough actual dialogue between characters that it works. It's one of the best moments of the comic is when you find out one of these guys was abused when he was a kid, and he does the logical thing. He uses his piece of the suit to take revenge on his abuser, but it's portrayed as, while cathartic for him, it just makes his life much, much worse. But all these guys, they aren't all unlikable. In fact, one of them is the guy dealing with the divorce is actually a pretty good guy. But these guys are not really equipped to have this kind of power. It's more even if it's a fraction of power. And I like the way. One of the good things I like about Green's art, he does great facial expressions on these characters. Here's one example of them all reacting to something, or I really love the one interaction between the Italian guy and his mother. She's a horrible Italian stereotype, but she's smarter than most of the characters in this book, and actually helps her son out in the right way. Pete's mother. She's one of the joke. The first joke is you think she's just an abusive person, but no, she's actually much smarter than any of Pete or his friends. And she actually helps them out when they're in trouble. And we have the poor guy dealing with this parole officer, and the government agents who are saying, well, what the hell happened to this robot suit? And since it's only 6 issues, I don't want to spoil too much. but it's a good solid read. I think we need more just good solid reads of stuff we haven't seen in a while. And I think Tischman plays well with the logic of the situation. He makes some good, there are some very good twists in the final issue. And it ends on a quasi cliffhanger, but I'd actually recommend it. You just want a good solid read, with a good concept. This would have been a pretty good movie, or I would have liked to have seen where Tischman took it further if he could have the chance. But in any case, if you can find Fraction, I recommend you look it up. And that's it for now, and I will talk to you later.